In the high-rise boardroom of one of the most prestigious tech firms in Silicon Valley, the air was thick with tension. The CEO, Marcus Bellamy, stood at the head of the table, his sharp gaze cutting through the sea of white faces before him. He had just been told that, after years of dedication, his position was no longer secure. With a deep sigh, he adjusted his tie, an expensive piece of craftsmanship that had once symbolized his hard-earned success, but now felt like a shackle. The meeting was over in less than 5 minutes. His resignation was demanded. But what his board members didn't know was that Marcus had prepared for this moment. His resignation would cost them more than just a CEO. It would be the unraveling of everything they thought they controlled. Would you be able to let go of everything you've worked for, only to destroy it from the inside? Marcus was about to answer that question with a plan so intricate it would take down everything his company had built. He had orchestrated every move, every detail. This wasn't just about a man losing his job, it was about revenge, methodical, cold, and calculated revenge. He smiled, knowing they had no idea what was coming. Would they regret firing him? They would, but it would be too late to fix their mistake. Now, all Marcus needed was a single, crucial moment to set the pieces in motion. Click *. You won't believe what happens next. Keep reading to find out what unfolds in the next chapter of this explosive corporate thriller. Marcus sat alone in his sleek office, the vast skyline of the city sprawling before him. The glass walls of the room provided a perfect view of the bustling city below, a city he had once conquered. Now, the same city seemed to mock him, its glittering lights reflecting the emptiness he felt inside. His phone buzzed, an incoming message. He didn't need to check it to know what it was, another attempt by his former colleagues to smooth over the fallout. They probably thought he was angry, emotional, and vulnerable. But Marcus wasn't angry. He had already moved past that stage. What he felt now was cold, calculated determination. As the CEO, he had learned to make decisions quickly, but now, with everything on the line, every move had to be deliberate. He picked up his phone, typing a single word into the message box, *done. With that, the final phase of his plan was set in motion. He could already hear the board's reaction when they discovered that he had not only taken a significant amount of intellectual property but also manipulated the very system that had been used to control him. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had been playing them all along. They had thought he was disposable, just another token black CEO, a figurehead to placate investors and keep the diversity quotas intact. They had no idea how wrong they were. In the weeks leading up to the meeting, Marcus had been meticulously laying the groundwork for this moment. Every financial statement, every board meeting, every whispered conversation in the hallways, it all came together to form the perfect storm. His first move had been to secure the company's most valuable assets, those pieces of intellectual property that the board had no idea were even at risk. It had been simple, almost too easy. Marcus had leveraged his position to move the data into a private server, hidden behind layers of encryption. The second part of the plan was more subtle but just as deadly. The company's stock was overvalued, based on projections that no longer made sense. But no one had noticed the discrepancies in the numbers, not until Marcus had already made his move. He had bought into the stock, but not just a small amount. Enough to control the voting shares, enough to tip the scales when the time came. Now, it was only a matter of waiting. The board would be blindsided. They would scramble, desperate to find a solution, but it would be too late. Marcus had already positioned himself in a way that no one could touch him. When they fired him, they had no idea they were actually giving him the power to destroy them from within. They believed they could control him with their petty racism, their assumptions about his abilities, and their lack of respect for him as a leader. But Marcus had known all along that they were the ones who were truly powerless. In the hours after his dismissal, the tension in the office was palpable. Whispers ran through the building as employees wondered what would happen next. Some were relieved to see the CEO go, while others felt the weight of the decision they couldn't yet understand. They didn't know that the foundation they had built their careers upon was about to crumble. As Marcus looked out over the city, he could almost taste the victory. He wasn't just going to make them pay for their disrespect, he was going to make sure they would never recover. The worst part was that they wouldn't even know what hit them until it was too late. As the days passed, Marcus' plan began to unfold with terrifying precision. The first sign that things were spiraling out of control came in the form of an emergency board meeting. The executives, who had once sat comfortably around their polished conference table, now found themselves sweating under the weight of their own decisions. They had assumed that firing Marcus would solve their problems, that his leadership had been the issue, that he was the one holding the company back. They couldn't have been more wrong. The moment the board members began to realize that the company's intellectual property was compromised, panic set in. It wasn't just a small loss. Marcus had taken everything of value, every innovation, every secret project that had been the company's future. They scrambled to trace back the breach, to find out how and when it happened, but the evidence was locked away in layers of encryption so deep that only Marcus himself could access it. Meanwhile, Marcus was already several steps ahead. He was in complete control of the stock options, having bought up the shares when the price was artificially inflated, a tactic he knew the board would never notice until it was too late. It was genius, simple, yet effective. When the company's valuation began to plummet, the board tried desperately to stabilize the situation, issuing statements, trying to placate investors, but Marcus had anticipated all of this. The press had already caught wind of the chaos. They had no idea what was really going on behind the scenes, but the story was starting to break. Headlines read, "Tech giants unseen crisis, CEO fired, stock plummets, and no one knows why." The public was confused. Investors were nervous. And the board, despite their best efforts, couldn't stop the momentum that Marcus had set into motion. The beauty of his plan was that it wasn't just about revenge, it was about control. Marcus wasn't just going to sit back and watch his former colleagues scramble, he was going to make sure they understood that he had always been the true power behind the scenes. He knew how to manipulate the system, how to bend it to his will. And now, as the company's stock continued its free fall, the executives were left to deal with a mess that they couldn't clean up. They had underestimated Marcus at every turn. They had underestimated the power of a black man who had been told time and again that he wasn't good enough, that he was just another diversity hire. But Marcus had never played by their rules. He had learned to survive in a world that wanted to see him fail, and now, he was making sure that they would never forget their mistake. His phone buzzed again, a message from an insider at the company. It was an encrypted message, sent with a warning, *, the board is panicking. They have no idea what you've done. * Marcus smiled to himself. They were just beginning to understand. What they didn't know was that he wasn't finished yet. This was only the beginning. Marcus had plans that would ensure that their empire came crumbling down, piece by piece. He would watch as they struggled to hold on to what was left, while he quietly pulled the strings from the shadows, making sure that in the end, the company would be his once more. The chaos within the company was reaching its peak, and Marcus could feel the tension intensifying with every passing hour. The board's frantic efforts to patch up the damage were only making things worse. Their latest move had been a desperate attempt to find anyone, to take the fall and restore some semblance of control. They needed a scapegoat, but Marcus had already ensured that no one could take the blame for what was happening. He had left no fingerprints, no trail to follow. The breach in security, the manipulation of stocks, the intellectual property he had quietly moved, it was all invisible. The executives were in full damage control mode, trying to reassure the press, calm down investors, and stabilize the stock, but nothing worked. The company's value continued to plummet. The damage was irreversible, and the more they tried to fix it, the worse it became. Marcus knew that the media was watching, and he relished the public spectacle. He had worked so hard to get to this point, to ensure that when the truth finally came out, it would be devastating. But now was not the time to make his move public. He had orchestrated this downfall with precision, and he needed to wait. Patience was the key. His next move would be calculated, strategic, and final. In the meantime, Marcus continued to monitor the situation from the shadows. He had people on the inside, trusted allies who had been quietly feeding him information. The latest update came from a source within the board itself. *, the board's legal team is working overtime to cover up the breach. They're planning to bring in a third-party audit to fix things, but they're losing control fast. You've broken them, Marcus. A small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. They were unraveling, and he was the one pulling the strings. Meanwhile, Marcus had a new focus. While the board was busy fighting a losing battle, he was securing his next move. He had already started to position himself with investors, those who had once been wary of him. They were now eager to align themselves with the person who could save them from the disaster unfolding. It was almost laughable how quickly they had turned. The very same investors who had questioned his abilities, who had dismissed him as a token figurehead, were now coming to him with open arms, desperate to invest in whatever he proposed. He had never forgotten how they had treated him, the way they had underestimated him, reduced him to nothing more than a diversity hire. He had spent years proving himself in a world that had never given him a fair chance, and now, it was his time. The irony was rich. The people who had once marginalized him were now begging for his help. Marcus didn't trust them. He didn't need them. But he knew how to use them. He would let them think they were in control, while he silently, subtly shifted the balance of power. He would watch as they scrambled to protect what was left of the company, while he quietly took everything from them. The board had made a fatal mistake when they fired him. They had underestimated his drive, his intelligence, and his ability to think multiple steps ahead. They had thought they could erase him from their company, but Marcus wasn't going anywhere. He was just getting started. As the days passed, Marcus continued to observe from the shadows, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. The board was still in chaos, scrambling to maintain their grip on the company, but it was only a matter of time before their last-ditch efforts to save themselves collapsed. Every move they made was one step closer to their downfall. Marcus could almost hear the desperation in their voices when they called emergency meetings, frantically searching for a solution that didn't exist. They had no idea how deeply they were sinking. Meanwhile, Marcus had already taken his next steps. The stock had continued to fall, and with each new drop in value, his control over the company grew stronger. His silent influence spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the company. Investors who had once overlooked him were now knocking on his door, eager to align themselves with the man who seemed to hold the keys to the company's future. It was laughable, really, how quickly they had turned. These were the same investors who had once dismissed him as nothing more than a placeholder CEO, a token meant to fill a diversity quota. Now they were eager to follow him, to be part of the plan that would rebuild the company, only they didn't realize that Marcus wasn't planning on rebuilding anything at all. He was planning on taking everything. The irony of it all was rich. The very people who had treated him as expendable were now begging for his help, for his guidance, for a piece of the empire they thought they owned. Marcus had always known that this moment would come, and now that it was here, he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. He had prepared for this for years. Every meeting, every handshake, every conversation had been a stepping stone toward this moment. He had studied his enemies carefully, understood their weaknesses, and patiently waited for the day when they would falter. And now that they had, he would strike with precision. But Marcus was not in a rush. He knew that timing was everything. He could have made his move immediately, exposed the board's incompetence, and taken over the company in an instant. But that wasn't what he wanted. He wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to watch as their empire crumbled, piece by piece, knowing that they had been the ones who had given him the power to destroy them. Marcus' phone buzzed again, another message from his insider at the company. The board had called in an external auditing firm to try to salvage the situation. They were trying to patch up the leaks, hoping that a third party would restore some sense of credibility. But Marcus knew that it was too late for any of that. The damage had been done, and now they were just trying to put a bandage on a bullet wound. He smiled to himself as he read the message. They were running out of time, and Marcus was watching the clock tick down with calm anticipation. He had already made his move, and now it was just a matter of letting the pieces fall into place. When the time came, he would reveal everything, every document, every email, every secret move he had made. And the board, the executives, and the investors who had once laughed at him would all be left to pick up the pieces of the company they thought they controlled. By the time they realized what had happened, it would be too late. Marcus was already in control, and nothing they did could change that. The tension within the company continued to escalate, as Marcus watched from a distance, his every move now deliberate and calculated. The board was on the edge of collapse, their latest efforts to salvage the company having done nothing but make the situation worse. The external audit they had brought in was, at best, a temporary distraction. It was clear that their attempts to restore order were nothing more than a desperate act of deflection. The cracks in the company's foundation were too deep, and Marcus had already ensured that the damage was beyond repair. As the board members grew more frantic, reaching out to their investors in a final attempt to maintain control, Marcus began to make his own moves. His plan was unfolding in layers, and each step was more devastating than the last. He was in constant contact with key players, both inside and outside the company, ensuring that his influence was expanding in all the right places. His silent manipulation of stock prices was working wonders, as investors who had once overlooked him now saw him as their only hope. The narrative they had built, the one where Marcus had been seen as an outsider, a figurehead, was crumbling. They were now running to him for help, unaware that he was the one who had set the entire chain of events into motion. Marcus could feel the power shifting. The tide was turning, and with each passing day, the board members were losing more and more of their credibility. The press had already begun to report on the crisis, but the true depth of the scandal was still under wraps. Marcus knew that when the truth finally came out, it would devastate them. He had carefully orchestrated the timing of his next move, his revelation of the board's incompetence and his own role in the company's downfall. It would hit like a bombshell, and it would destroy everything they had built. But Marcus wasn't in a hurry. He was enjoying watching them squirm. The anticipation of his success was intoxicating. Every desperate call from the board, every press release trying to spin the situation, only fueled his desire to see them fail. He had been the one they had discarded, the one they had underestimated, and now they were learning the true cost of their arrogance. One night, as he sat in his penthouse, overlooking the lights of the city, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his insider, a final report on the board's last-ditch efforts to fix things. They've just agreed to a buyout offer from a rival company. They're trying to salvage what they can, but the investors are losing faith. They know it's over. Marcus read the message with a sense of satisfaction. The board had finally done it, their last act of desperation. They had sealed their own fate. The buyout was not going to save them. It was only going to make things worse. The rival company would take over, but Marcus had already secured his position with them. He was about to turn the tables in a way they never saw coming. This buyout would be the final piece in his puzzle, and once it was complete, Marcus would have the company in his grasp. All of the hard work, all of the years of preparation, were about to pay off. The moment was drawing near. Marcus had been patient, but now he was ready to make his move. It would be the ultimate revenge, a moment that would forever change the course of the company, and his own future. The deal was set. Marcus could feel the tension in the air as the final pieces of his plan were about to fall into place. The rival company, which had initially shown only a passing interest in the buyout, was now fully on board. Marcus had orchestrated every move with the precision of a master chess player, and now, they were about to make their move. The buyout wasn't just a strategic acquisition, it was a key part of Marcus' greater plan. As he reviewed the terms of the deal one last time, he couldn't help but smirk. The board had no idea what was coming. They thought they were saving themselves, but Marcus had been several steps ahead of them all along. When the announcement came, it would shock the world, but the board would be completely blindsided. Their desperation had led them into Marcus' trap. The company's value was about to plummet even further, and Marcus would be the one to profit from it. He wasn't just going to take back the company, he was going to dismantle it, piece by piece, and leave the wreckage for the people who had once thought they were untouchable. He had waited for this moment for so long, and now it was finally within his grasp. The final negotiations were set for the following morning. The rival company would offer a massive buyout, and Marcus would use the leverage he had built over the last few weeks to secure the terms he wanted. Once the deal was signed, the board would have no choice but to accept the inevitable. They had lost. The power had shifted, and Marcus was now the one in control. As he prepared for the meeting, Marcus couldn't help but think back on everything that had led him to this point. The countless hours spent in boardrooms, the backdoor deals, the subtle manipulation of the media, it had all been a part of the plan. And now, as the sun began to rise over the city, Marcus felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. He would walk into that meeting room, sit across from the board members who had once belittled him, and he would sign the deal that would destroy everything they had built. It would be the ultimate revenge. But even more than that, it would be his victory. He had done what no one thought possible. He had taken the very thing they had tried to use to break him, their prejudice, and turned it into the weapon that would bring them to their knees. As he walked into the boardroom, the energy in the room was palpable. The board members, once confident and smug, now looked nervous, their faces tight with worry. Marcus didn't flinch. He had already won. He was in control now. The deal was sealed. The buyout was happening, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. They had underestimated him, and now, they were going to pay the price. The board members tried to argue, tried to convince him to reconsider, but Marcus remained calm, collected, and silent. This was no longer about business, it was about power. He had the power now, and they had nothing. As he stood up and walked out of the room, the weight of the victory settled in. The company was his once more. And this time, he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. He had waited long enough to see this moment come, and now that it was here, Marcus knew that his future was secure. The board had played their final hand, and Marcus had played his better. They had made the fatal mistake of underestimating him, and now they would learn the price of their arrogance. The board members, once smug and self-assured, sat in stunned silence as Marcus stood before them, the weight of the moment settling over them like a dark cloud. The deal had been signed. The company they had spent years building, that they had thought was beyond their reach, was now in the hands of a man they had once cast aside. As Marcus walked out of the boardroom, he could feel the stares of the executives burning into his back. They had never truly understood him, never seen his potential beyond the narrow lens of their biases and prejudices. To them, he had always been just another minority in a boardroom full of white faces, a diversity hire meant to check a box. But now, it was clear, he had outplayed them at every turn. The moment he stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind him, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. He had done it. The company was his, and the board had no power left. They had failed to see the man he truly was. They had failed to understand what he was capable of. But now, they were learning the hard way. As the elevator descended, Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that the hard work wasn't over yet. He had taken the first step, seizing control of the company, but now it was time to reshape it, to bend it to his will. The next phase of his plan was just beginning. He would rebuild this empire from the ground up, but this time, he would do it on his terms. The executives who had once whispered behind his back, the ones who had undermined him at every opportunity, would soon find themselves irrelevant. His rise would be the story of the company, and they would be nothing more than footnotes. But it wasn't just about the company. Marcus had always been driven by more than just money or power. His revenge was personal. He had spent years in a system that had undervalued him, a system that had dismissed his talent and vision because of the color of his skin. He had been underestimated at every turn, told that he wasn't good enough, that he didn't belong in the rooms where decisions were made. And now, as he stood at the top, he knew that this was the moment that would define his legacy. This wasn't just about taking over a company, it was about proving something bigger. It was about showing the world that a black man, despite the odds, could rise to the highest ranks of power and take control of everything that had been denied him. As Marcus walked out of the building and into the night, the city lights reflecting in the glass windows, he felt a sense of satisfaction unlike anything he had ever known. This was his victory, his moment of triumph. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but Marcus was ready. He had waited too long for this, and now that he had it, he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. He was on top, and no one was going to take that from him. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus, now fully in control, moved quickly to reshape the company in his image. His first step was to completely overhaul the board of directors. The executives who had once looked down on him, who had considered him expendable, were no longer part of the picture. Their resignations came swiftly, their departure marked by the realization that they had been replaced by people who understood the true vision of the company, Marcus' vision. As he sat in the newly furnished executive suite, overlooking the city below, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had once been the outsider, the one constantly reminded of his differences, the one who had been excluded from important decisions simply because of his race. But now, those same people who had judged him were the ones sitting on the sidelines, watching as he took everything they had worked for and built something greater from it. The phone calls, the meetings, the strategic decisions, everything was now his to command. Marcus had carefully curated his new team, selecting individuals who shared his drive, his intelligence, and most importantly, his commitment to breaking down the barriers that had once held him back. He had always known that true leadership came from empowering others, and now he was in a position to do just that. As the weeks went by, the company began to transform. The employees who had once felt the weight of systemic racism in their daily lives began to see a new future, one where they were valued for their talents and not their skin color. The atmosphere in the office was changing, from one of fear and uncertainty to one of excitement and opportunity. And yet, despite the progress he was making, Marcus knew that there were still many challenges ahead. There were still those who would try to undermine him, still those who refused to accept that a black man could rise to the top in a world dominated by white executives. But Marcus had learned long ago that it wasn't the people who doubted him that mattered, it was the people who believed in him. And now, he had the power to prove them all wrong. The press, which had once dismissed him as a figurehead, was now scrambling to cover his every move. Headlines were being written about his rise to power, about how he had taken control of the company in the most dramatic way possible. He had become a symbol of defiance, a living testament to the idea that no matter how many obstacles were placed in front of him, he could always rise above them. But Marcus was more than just a symbol, he was a force to be reckoned with. And as he looked out at the city once more, he realized that this was only the beginning. His journey had only just started. There was still so much more to accomplish, so much more to prove. But for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly free. He was no longer bound by the expectations of others, no longer shackled by the limits they had imposed on him. He was the master of his own destiny now, and nothing could stop him. The days turned into weeks, and Marcus continued to solidify his control over the company. The transformation he had envisioned was no longer just a concept, it was becoming a reality. Every decision he made, every move he took, was reshaping the company's future. Marcus had become more than just the CEO, he was the architect of a new era. His influence was now absolute, and those who had once doubted him were either on his team or out of the picture entirely. The media, which had once painted him as a temporary figurehead, now looked to him as a leader in the business world. Journalists who had written about his unlikely rise were now praising his strategic brilliance. Marcus knew that this was just the beginning of his journey, but it was a sweet beginning nonetheless. He had not only reclaimed what was his, but he had also built something better in its place. The boardroom that had once been a place of tension and exclusion had transformed into a space of collaboration and innovation. Marcus surrounded himself with sharp minds, people who saw the world through the same lens he did. Diversity was no longer just a buzzword in the company, it was the backbone of its success. He believed that true innovation came from bringing together people with different perspectives, and now, the company's culture was a testament to that belief. As the company thrived under his leadership, the world outside was watching with growing interest. Marcus' name was on everyone's lips. He had done what many thought was impossible, he had taken a broken company and turned it into a powerhouse, all while dismantling the systemic barriers that had held him back. Yet, as much as Marcus relished his success, he knew that the real battle was not in business alone, it was in the fight for equity and equality. There were still many challenges to face, many obstacles to overcome. The world had changed in some ways, but there was still a long way to go. As he walked through the office halls, watching his employees thrive, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on his journey. He had faced adversity, not just from his competitors, but from the very system he had once worked to be a part of. His race had always been a factor in the way people viewed him, and he had spent years proving his worth. But now, as he looked around at the diverse faces in the office, people who had once been told they didn't belong, he realized that the true victory wasn't just about power or money. It was about changing the narrative. It was about proving that the world didn't have to be the way it had always been. That people like him, people who had been marginalized, could rise to the top and lead with purpose, integrity, and vision. Marcus knew there would always be challenges ahead, but now, he was in a position to face them head-on. He wasn't just fighting for his own success anymore, he was fighting for a future where people like him could have the same opportunities as anyone else. And that fight, he knew, would define his legacy. As the sun set over the city skyline, Marcus felt a sense of peace. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. He had achieved something that no one had thought possible, and now, he was ready for whatever came next. Marcus had always known that true power was not just about control, it was about influence. Now, with the company thriving under his leadership, he found himself at the center of a web of influence that extended far beyond the boardroom. His success was no longer confined to the walls of his company, it had rippled through the entire industry. Competitors, once dismissive of him, were now studying his every move. Investors were eager to align themselves with him, eager to see what he would do next. And Marcus? He was just getting started. The spotlight had shifted from the boardroom battles to the broader implications of his success. He was no longer just the CEO of a tech company, he had become a symbol of resilience, of defiance, and of change. He was proving to the world that a black man could not only survive in a space dominated by white executives, but he could thrive and revolutionize that very space. The press, once skeptical, now followed his every decision, analyzing his strategies and dissecting his every move. Marcus had never wanted the fame, but he understood its power. It was a tool that could be used to amplify his message, a message of empowerment and equality. He knew that with his success came the responsibility to lead with integrity, to set an example for those who had been told time and again that they would never be enough. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about breaking barriers, about proving that the systems of old could be dismantled, piece by piece. Marcus wasn't naive. He knew that there would be those who would try to tear him down, who would try to dismiss his accomplishments as luck or a fluke. But he also knew that his story was bigger than them. His story was the story of countless people who had been overlooked, underestimated, and marginalized because of the color of their skin. And as he stood at the helm of his company, watching the world take notice, Marcus knew that he was no longer fighting just for himself, he was fighting for a future where people like him would no longer be forced to prove their worth. The company had grown beyond what anyone had imagined. It wasn't just profitable, it was innovative, forward-thinking, and inclusive. Marcus had ensured that every aspect of the company reflected his values of diversity, integrity, and progress. The employees, once afraid to speak up, now found their voices. They were empowered to be their authentic selves, to contribute ideas without fear of judgment or exclusion. Marcus had created a culture where talent was the only thing that mattered. As he sat in his office one evening, watching the city below, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The long hours, the struggles, the countless times he had been told no, he had proved them wrong, not by defying the odds, but by changing the odds. Marcus Bellamy had not just become a leader, he had become a pioneer. The future, once uncertain, now seemed full of limitless possibilities. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus smiled. The journey was far from over, but the foundation was solid. He had set the course, and nothing was going to stop him from reaching his ultimate goal. This was only the beginning. The company continued to soar under Marcus' leadership, but as the days passed, he began to realize that success was not just about growing a business or gaining influence, it was about leaving a lasting legacy. He had taken everything they had tried to strip from him, and now he was building something that would outlast them all. The industry, once skeptical of his abilities, now saw him as a visionary, a trailblazer who had broken every barrier in his path. The name Marcus Bellamy had become synonymous with resilience and power. He had proven to everyone, including those who had once doubted him, that he was not just a figurehead but a leader who could reshape the very fabric of the corporate world. His story was one of struggle and triumph, of fighting against a system that had always tried to push him aside, to diminish his value. But now, he was the one calling the shots, and the world was taking notice. As the company grew, Marcus began to focus on the future. His vision had always been bigger than just one company. He had always believed that true power came from creating opportunities for others, from lifting people up and giving them the chance to succeed on their own terms. Now, he was in a position to do just that. Marcus' next goal was clear: to build an ecosystem of businesses, to diversify into areas that had historically been dominated by others, and to create opportunities for the next generation of leaders. His success was not just his own, it was a stepping stone for others who would follow in his footsteps. Marcus knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges, but he was no longer afraid. He had already faced the hardest battles of his life and emerged victorious. The obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable were now nothing more than stepping stones to greater heights. His work was far from over, but the foundation he had laid was solid. He had built something that could not be taken away, a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. In the years to come, Marcus would continue to push the boundaries of what was possible, to innovate, and to lead with integrity. His journey had started with a single step, a moment of doubt, and a desire to prove everyone wrong. But now, as he looked back on everything he had accomplished, he realized that it was never just about proving them wrong, it was about proving to himself that he could do it. Marcus Bellamy had not only conquered the business world, he had reshaped it. And as he stood at the pinnacle of his success, with the world at his feet, he knew that the best was yet to come.